So last week we heard the story of the exodus of the people of God out of Egypt into the desert. And they were very happy to be out of Egypt because they would no longer be slaves. So this is the story of what happened when they got to the desert. This is the desert. The desert is a dangerous place. People do not go into the desert unless they have to. There's no water there or food. Without food and water, we die. And when the wind comes, it blows the sand, and the shape of the desert changes, and people get lost. Some never come back. In the daytime, it's so hot that people have to wear lots of clothes to protect themselves from the sun and the blowing sand. At night, it gets very cold, and they need many layers of clothes to stay warm. The desert is a dangerous place. People only go there if they have to. Now, the people of God went through the water into freedom. And they were very happy. Miriam led the dancing. But now that people were free, they could go anywhere they wanted and do anything they wanted. But where should they go? And what should they do? What is the best way? Now, God loved the people so much that he gave them the 10 best ways to live. And sometimes these ways are called the 10 Commandments. As the people of God crossed the desert, they followed fire by night and smoke by day. But some began to complain. There wasn't enough water. There wasn't enough food. So God helped Moses to find food and water. And finally, they came to the great mountain. The people came close to the mountain, but they were afraid to touch it. Mount Sinai was covered in fire and smoke. Moses was the only one who had the courage to climb up into the fire and smoke to meet God. When Moses got to the top of the mountain, he came so close to God, and God came so close to Moses that he knew what God wanted him to do. God wanted him to write the 10 best ways to live on stones and bring them down the mountain to the people. God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. And Moses gave them to the people. And they gave them to us. Here are the 10 best ways. Love God. Love people. And God loves us. When we put the 10 best ways all together, this is what they tell us. And when we say us, we mean God's people, for each of us, as well as for all of us together. So, don't serve other gods. Make no idols to worship. Be serious when you say my name. Keep the Sabbath holy. Honor your father and mother. Don't kill. Don't break your marriage. Don't steal. Don't lie. And don't even want what others have. Huh. Well, I know, these are all hard. God did not say that these are easy things to do. They are the 10 best ways. They are called the 10 Commandments. And they are hard, perhaps even impossible. But we're supposed to try. They mark the way like a path. I wonder which of these commandments you like the best. I wonder which is the most important. I wonder which one of these is especially for you. I wonder if there's any we can leave out and still have all that we need. And I wonder the same way for the story. I wonder which part of the story you liked the best. Which part of the story was the most important? Which part of the story was especially for you? And I wonder if there's any part of the story we could leave out and still have all the story that we need. Now, I've read a few parenting books, and they always say that you should tell someone what you want, not what you don't want. And so I took the liberty of rephrasing some of these 10 best ways. There is only one God. Worship only God. Be serious when you say God. Keep the Sabbath. That was pretty positive already. Honor your parents. Same. Life is sacred. Be faithful in marriage. Deal honestly with others. And tell the truth. And I couldn't decide which was better. Want what you have, or be grateful. Maybe they're the same. Anyway, I'm going to go read a story and say a prayer. So today's story is called Brothers in Hope, and it's the story of the Lost Boys of Sudan, written by Mary Williams and illustrated by Gregory Christie. I was born in southern Sudan. I lived with my mother and father and grandparents and 2 sisters in a small mud and thatch house. We were considered wealthy because my father owned many cattle. As a young boy, I was afraid of these big animals. "I am too small to care for such big animals," I cried when my father told me I'd have to learn to tend the cattle. My father just smiled. "Garang, be brave," he said. "Your heart and mind are strong. There is nothing you cannot do." And when I turned 8 years old, I began to tend some of the small calves on my own. I cleaned them and nursed them when they were sick and led them to the very best pastures and watering holes. And I quickly grew to love these animals. And then one day, everything in my life changed. I was far from home tending my animals when my village was attacked. I could hear bangs like thunder and the flashing of lights in the distance. Suddenly, an airplane was circling above, and clouds of dust rose from the ground, and bullets began to rain down on my herd. Many of the animals were killed. Others ran away in fear. My throat and eyes were full of dust, but I found my way to the forest where I hid in the shadows of the trees. When the storm of bullets passed, I ran back to my village to find my family, but everyone was gone. The houses were burning and everything was destroyed. I began to wander down the road, and soon I met other boys who could not find their families, and we began to search together. And as we walked, we met more boys on the road. And at first, there was just me, one. And soon, their one became many, too many to count. Before war came, I had never seen so many people in one place. My village had only 100 people. Now I was among a moving village with thousands of boys. Like me, the other boys were away from their villages, tending their cattle when the war came. The adults and girls had stayed behind. Some of the boys were only 5 years old. The oldest boys were not more than 15. We were children, not used to caring for ourselves. Without our parents, we were lost. We had to learn to take care of one another. The older boys decided to have a meeting. "We must work together if we are to survive," one of the boys said. "We will form groups and choose a leader for each group." "Garang Dang," someone yelled, my name. I had been chosen to lead a group of 35 boys. I was proud, but scared. I knew how to take care of animals, not boys. But I did not want to let my fear keep me from helping my brothers. And then I remembered what my father had told me. "Garang, be brave. Your heart and mind are strong. There is nothing you cannot do." So I joined a group of leaders, and we decided we could walk to the country called Ethiopia. Before war came to our villages, many of us had heard elders talk of Ethiopia. They had said that the Ethiopians would provide a safe place for the Sudanese running away from the war. Some of the older boys knew we must travel east to reach Ethiopia. It was very far, and the journey would be dangerous, but it was our only hope. So we decided it was best to walk at night and sleep in the forest during the day to avoid soldiers and the severe heat of the sun. Many argued it was too dangerous to walk at night because of animals hunting for food. After what much talk, we agreed that the soldiers and their warplanes were more dangerous than the animals. We also decided that the older boys would adopt younger boys who couldn't care for themselves. I chose a little boy in my group named Chuti Bol. He was only 5 and cried for his mother. The next evening, we found the road to Ethiopia. We were glad to have a full, bright moon, but it was still very dark. To make sure we did not lose anyone, each boy held the hand of the boy in front of him. Chuti was too small to walk long distances. I often carried him on my back. Everyone was tired and hungry, but no one complained. There were a few boys in my group who knew how to find wild fruits that were good to eat, and others who could hunt wild birds. Some days we had food to share, but most days there was no food to be found. We ate leaves and bark from the trees. Finding food was not the only problem. Many days it was hot and dry and we were very thirsty. Sometimes we had to drink our urine to get moisture into our bodies. There were times when we got very sick. We made sure to rest often so the weaker boys could keep up. We did many things to help us forget our hunger and our aching bodies. We played games and told stories. We made animal figures from mud, mostly cattle. I told Chuti how I used to care for calves. He was so impressed. He insisted I sculpt a herd of cattle for him. I was glad Chuti liked the cattle, even if they were just made of mud. One evening when we were walking along the road, I heard Chuti crying. I picked him up and asked what was wrong. I'm scared you will leave me like my mother and father, Chuti sobbed. Chuti, your mother and father did not want to leave you. They loved you very much. They lost you when the war came. Don't worry, I will take care of you, I said. But for now, daylight is coming and we must find a shady place to sleep. We need our strength to cross the border into Ethiopia tomorrow. I put Chuti down under a tree. He was so tired from crying that he fell right to sleep. And as I lay down beside him, I thought of my own parents and how much I missed them. The following evening, we crossed into Ethiopia. Everyone in my group made it. I was proud to be their leader. Other groups were not as lucky. Many boys had died along the way. The first people we encountered were a small group of women washing clothes in a river. They were surprised to see so many boys all alone and scared. Who are these lost boys? An elderly woman asked. We are fleeing war, said one of our leaders. You look hungry and sick, another woman said. We must show you the way to the refugee camp. What is a refugee camp? I asked. The women told us a refugee camp is a place for people to go when their country is not safe. And the kind women stopped their washing and put us on the road to the camp. In the refugee camp, we met a man named Tom who was from the United States. His job was to help refugees like us. I will do my best to get you food and shelter, Tom said. And Tom was true to his promise. For the first time in a long while, we ate every day. It wasn't much, just lentils and flour, but after months without almost nothing to eat, it seemed like a feast. We were given tools to build our own mud and thatch shelters, and to me, they were palaces. We also had the chance to go to school. In the beginning, we didn't want to go. We wanted to play and forget our hard times. The adults tried to bribe us with cookies, but still many boys did not go to school, and the adults became upset with us. One day, a teacher visited me. Garang, you must make sure your group comes to school every day, she said. Education is very important. It can be like your mothers and fathers. It can speak for you in the future when your parents cannot. The teacher's word reminded me of how much I miss my parents, and I decided to go to school to honor them and to feel that they were still with me. My group began to go to school too, even if there were no cookies. English was my favorite subject. We didn't have pencils and paper, so I practiced writing my lessons in the dirt with a stick. I also learned how to pray and worship. Many of us began to go to church every weekend, and faith gave us hope and strength. And we began to tell people, I am not lost. God knows where I am. And just when it seemed that things were finally okay for us, we heard that war was stirring again. And in the distance, we saw the flashing lights and heard the terrible thunder. And suddenly, there were changes in the camp. Many people began to leave, and soon there was not enough food. People in Ethiopia began fighting, and we couldn't stay in their country anymore. So we were chased back to the border of Sudan by war. And it was the rainy season, and the huge Gilo River was swollen with water, blocking us from getting to Sudan on the opposite bank. We gathered on the riverbank, and many boys were afraid to enter the river, The current was strong and the rushing water roared like an angry lion. I ordered my group to stay together to help those who were sick and not strong swimmers. And when we fled the refugee camp, I had taken my school books with me, and as I stood on the river's edge, I decided I would not leave them behind. They were my future, my mother and father. I tied my school books around my waist, grabbed Chuti, and jumped into the river. I was so afraid I don't remember being in the water. I only remember hauling Chuti and myself onto the opposite bank. I made sure Chuti was okay, and then I waited anxiously for the rest of our group. As the boys began to emerge from the river, I prayed and counted 1, 12, 22, 27, 31, 35. We were reunited with everyone in our group, every last one. And we prayed to God to take care of the souls of the brothers we had lost in the river. And we thanked him for sparing us and prayed for a safe end to our journey. Later that day, as we prepared for sleep, we saw many big trucks approaching. They were moving very fast, and their rumbling tires sent huge dust clouds into the air. Frightened that there were soldiers in the trucks, we ran to hide. As the trucks drew closer, my heart began to pound so hard I could hear nothing else. I huddled close to my group, covered with my face with my hands, and waited. After a few minutes, I gathered my courage and went to peek through the trees, and I saw one of the drivers. It was Tom. It's safe, I cried. Tom has come to save us. Many of the boys ran out from the forest, and soon the trucks were surrounded by boys. Everyone wanted to be taken to safety. Tom began to speak. I'm very sorry, but we can't take all of you. There isn't enough room. For now, we will take only the smallest and those who are too sick to walk. The rest of you must keep walking to Kenya. We will show you the way. Your worst days will soon be behind you. My group decided that Chuti should go on the truck and the rest of us would walk to Kenya. Chuti wept when I put him on the truck. You're leaving me, Chuti cried. No, Chuti said. I'm sending you to a safe place, and we will join you soon. And until then, you must be strong. And as the trucks drove away, we could see Chuti crying as he watched us through the window. And we were sad to see him leave, but happy that he would be cared for until we met him in Kenya. We rejoined the other group of boys on the road to Kenya. Some parts of the road were well cleared and marked. Others were not. We made sure to keep the trail well marked for the groups behind us. Many weeks later, we made it to a refugee camp in Kenya called Kakuma. There were thousands of people in the camp, but I was determined to find Chuti. I asked boys from the other groups if they had seen him. One of the leaders told me Tom was taking care of him, and someone showed me Tom's house, and there I found Chuti eating candy and drawing a picture. And when he saw me, he ran to me and jumped into my arms. And I thanked Tom for taking such good care of Chuti. Then Tom said he needed my help. Although you're safe for now, my work is not done, Tom explained. The war in Sudan is not over, and you and your brothers need to find a place to call home. But what can I do, I asked. You must tell me your story. What has happened to you since war came to your country, Tom said. And your story can prevent war from creating more lost children, and you can help find a home for yourself and for your brothers. Your words will move caring people to help. And so I shared my story with Tom. I talked all day and all night, and then we cried and prayed, and after telling my story, the storm of war no longer seemed as scary. The thunder, not so loud. A few days after our talk, Tom left the camp. Without Tom around, things began to change, and life in Kenya became very hard. There was not enough food, and people were often sick, and many died. Some boys in my group became so weak from hunger that they could no longer attend school. And we thought of a way for everyone to get food and education. We took turns foraging food and going to school. At night, the ones who foraged would share their food with the others who went to school, and the ones who went to school would share their lessons. In this way, we were able to feed our bodies and our minds. And as I grew older, I tried to improve the conditions in the camp. I helped form a drama club and a soccer league so we could have fun things to do. And I became a health educator, and I taught boys to boil dirty water before drinking it and other ways to prevent sickness. Judy was growing older, too, and I continued to care for him, and he helped me in my work. He was a very smart boy who often tutored other boys in math and English. I became a young man with responsibilities, which made me feel good. But despite my best efforts, life continued to be a daily struggle for survival. I often worried about my future and Judy's. I was 21 years old when Tom returned to Kakuma. And when I went to greet him, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair had turned gray. I hugged him very hard. "You have changed, Tom," I said. Tom laughed. "Yes, I'm now an old man, and you are a young man." "Where have you been, Tom? Did you forget about us?" I asked. "I did not forget you, Garang," Tom said. "Your words have been with me, and I have been sharing them with people in many countries. And now, the United States is offering you and your brothers a home." And Tom called a meeting and told us about the United States, and he said there would be people to come and teach us about this country in preparation for our journey. I remembered our teachers in Ethiopia telling us that the United States was very far away and life there was very different. I was happy to hear that my brothers and I would have a new place to live, but I was also very afraid. I wondered if people in America would accept me, a lost boy, with nothing but a few tattered school books. I thought it would be better to stay in Kakuma. I went to the forest to be alone and think about the things that Tom had told us. I also remembered my father's words. "Your heart and mind are strong. There is nothing you cannot do." When I first heard those words, I didn't understand them, and now I knew them to be true. My heart was strong with faith and the love of my brothers, and my mind was filled with wisdom from books and the many changes in my life. I was no longer afraid. I would find the strength to make a new life. I would find a new future. So that reminds me a little bit of the people of God when they left Egypt and were in the desert. And they didn't know where to go or what to do. And they just had to trust. They spent 40 years in the desert. It's a long time.